Hello, good evening. Welcome back to another edition of Trek Talk, where I will discuss and review one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series. Today I'll be looking at the episode Galileo 7. But before I go any further, I did want to say some things. I assume most people who watch this stream will be familiar with Mike Alonso, aka Clobbern Times, who is a fellow YouTuber and a friend of the channel. Uh, and you're probably also aware that Clobby went into the hospital, I believe it was on Sunday, and has been in intensive care. His family, let me bring this up here. Here we go. His family has started a GoFundMe to get money to help, of course, defray the medical costs. And I did see on X earlier, I guess, that he has opened his eyes and he has regained consciousness, which is a great sign because he had been unresponsive up until I think earlier today. So it is great news and definitely pulling for Clobby and hoping that he will be able to bounce back from this. And if you have any prayers to offer, send them Clobby's way because he needs them. Clobby, if you hear this, we're pulling for you, buddy. And also, I put the link to the GoFundMe in my chat here, so anyone who comes to the chat can access that link to go to the GoFundMe if they would like. Okay. I guess I'll go ahead and proceed here. Again, I think Clobby would approve, being a big Trek fan himself. As I mentioned, taking a look at Galileo 7, which in production code order is episode 14 of the original series. And as always, I'll be reading from Mark Cushman's book, These Are the Voyages, for behind the scenes information. So let me go ahead and I'll just start there. Uh, the teleplay on this was by Oliver Crawford and Shimon Winselberg, uh, aka S. Bar David, and directed by Robert Gist or Gist. And this is from an NBC press release on December 20th, 1966. The severely damaged shuttlecraft from the USS Enterprise. Hold on a sec here. Is my volume okay? Yeah, I guess it's okay. Yeah, I think I'm good. Okay, the severely damaged shuttlecraft from the USS Enterprise threatens to become a tomb for its trapped crew after it crashes on a planet and loses contact in the Galileo 7 on NBC Network's colorcast of Star Trek, January 5th, 1967. Marooned and under attack by ape-like creatures, a landing party with Mr. Spock in charge faces imminent death when all communications are cut off. Meanwhile, in the orbiting Enterprise, Captain Kirk must decide whether to continue the search or abandon his men to deliver emergency medical supplies to a plague-ridden planet some distance away. Cushman continues. Kirk's efforts to locate his missing shipmates have been hampered by a stellar occurrence in the region where the shuttlecraft was lost. The ship's sensory equipment is barely functioning. Adding to Kirk's dilemma is High Commander Ferris traveling on the Enterprise with orders that the ship must soon leave the area. Meanwhile, damage to the Galileo and limited fuel reserves have Spock calculating that two of the seven survivors must stay behind, facing almost certain death. There are three layers of conflict here: man versus beast, man versus man, and man versus himself. As with the enemy within, this is an examination of the requirement of command with a look at the two sides of the human personality. This time, however, the case study is Mr. Spock. The Galileo 7 provides an important stepping stone in the development and understanding of the character of Spock. The story is rich with conflict and filled with thrills and chills. There is even an analogy incorporated into the script for the benefit of Americans in 1967, who didn't understand how a small and somewhat primitive nation like North Vietnam was capable of holding its own against the might of the United States Armed Forces. Or, for that matter, why the North Vietnamese would even choose to continue to fight. Spock says, quote, "When we demonstrated our superior weapons, by all accounts, they should have fled." McCoy responds, "You mean they should have respected us?" Mr. Spock, respect is a rational process. Did it ever occur to you that they might react emotionally, with anger? Despite what works, the script has moments of being heavy handed, and much of the headbutting between the players is redundant. Commissioner Ferris is a one note character, and the conflict on Kirk's bridge suffers from even more repetitiveness than the point counterpoint debates in and around Spock's shuttlecraft. As for the production, director Robert Gist guided the inconsistent material with an uneven hand. Some moments and some shots are inspired. However, watching the oversized spears clumsily heaved into the air, clearly by normal sized stagehands and not by giants, then falling yards short of their target, prompts snickers, not worry. The angling of the camera for the moment when the huge beast engulfs Gaetano's body only shows the creature to be smaller than otherwise depicted. And perhaps worst of all, the paper mache boulder that pins Spock's leg appears to weigh half a pound. When filming ended, the problems continued. The opticals were demanding, and the end results added to the unevenness of the episode. Film effects of Hollywood, which fared better with Balance of Terror, struggled here. Many shots don't match the requirements of the script. For example, stars are actually seen flying past the Enterprise as it orbits the planet. Worse, at one point, the stars are seen moving through the planet itself. The Galileo 7 reached for the sky but fell short on both budget and time needed to make it right. Regardless, even a flawed episode of the first Star Trek makes for superior TV. Okay, so I guess I'll go ahead and we'll get into the episode itself. All right. So the Enterprise is on course to Machus 3 with medical supplies which are badly needed. On the way, they pass by a quasar called Murasaki 312. Kirk plans to use the opportunity to study the quasar. But Galactic High Muckety Muck Ferris doesn't approve, as his priority is to get the supplies delivered as soon as possible. Um, so, in order to make up time, Kirk dispatches the shuttlecraft Galileo along with some crewmen to investigate the quasar. Now, the crew on board the shuttlecraft includes Spock, Scotty, of course, McCoy, Latimer, who is the pilot, Boma, who I believe is an astrophysicist, and Yeoman Mears. As they approach the quasar, radiation levels spike, which start interfering with the craft. They lose contact with the Enterprise as they get pulled toward the quasar. The deionization caused by the quasar prevents communication and also knocks out the sensors, so they can't see the shuttle or contact it. Kirk notes that there are 4 solar systems in the era, and the shuttlecraft could be in any one of them. Ferris is, of course, not happy with this delay that will be caused by looking for the missing crewman. Like most authority figures that come aboard the Enterprise, he kind of throws his weight around and he has a lot of opinions about how Kirk should be commanding his ship. I like the look on Kirk's face here. He's clearly not happy. However, Uhura informs Kirk that there is a planet called Taurus 2, which is located near the center of the quasar's effect. Meanwhile, the shuttle has had a rough landing on Taurus 2, and some of the crew are injured in the landing. And the shuttlecraft is also damaged. McCoy informs them that the atmosphere is breathable, so Spock orders Latimer and Gaetano to do a security sweep of the area while Scotty works to repair the shuttle. The Enterprise takes up orbit over Taurus 2 and then launches the shuttlecraft Columbia to begin a search of the planet. And because of the deionization, their sensors are not working. So they basically have to rely on visual contact. So the shuttles are literally running visual searches. They're just flying around and I guess looking out the windows hoping they can spot somebody. And again, they have a whole planet to search. All right, so McCoy wastes no time in beginning to needle Spock, noting that this situation is his big opportunity to show that logic serves as the best basis for command. But Spock has no interest in debating the point with him, despite McCoy's best efforts to provoke one. Scotty informs Spock that they have lost a lot of their fuel and they won't be able to make orbital velocity unless they shed 500 pounds. This is assuming that they can get the shuttle working again. And this is an issue, as Spock has already noted, that due to the ionization, the Enterprise will have to rely on visual contact, making it impossible to be seen unless they can actually get up into orbit. And again, they're on a time frame because, of course, the Enterprise is going to have to leave to make a rendezvous to deliver these supplies. It's apparent that in order to lose the 500 pounds, it's likely that 3 crewmen will have to stay behind. Lieutenant Boma makes a suggestion of drawing lots, which amuses Spock a bit, and he quickly dismisses that and assures Boma that his decision on who stays or goes will be guided, of course, by logic. Meanwhile, Latimer and Gaetano are searching the area and hear some sort of sound. They're not sure what it is. And then Latimer, one of these alien creatures on the planet, spears Latimer in the back. Gaetano fires his phaser and drives the attackers away. And then Spock and Boma arrive. And the size of the spear, of course, suggests that the alien attackers are huge. Spock notes that the point is similar to a spearhead found on Earth in the 1920s, and notes that the spears aren't very efficient weapons. Boma and Gaetano are angered by Spock's apparent disregard for the death of Latimer and for his remains, and they say that they will take the body back to the shuttle. And I mean, hey, at least that's one person you don't have to worry about if they're going to stay or go. Now, on the Enterprise, the search has turned up nothing so far. And Ferris reminds Kirk that they're on a timetable and tells Kirk that he has 24 hours left to search. Now, back at the shuttle, McCoy and Mears find some equipment that can be left behind. But Spock says that they're still going to need to remove about 150 pounds or at least one person. Boma wants to perform a funeral service for Latimer, and as the commander, it is Spock's responsibility to say some words at the service. Spock, however, isn't terribly interested, noting that they're working against time to get the shuttle fixed. And this pisses off both Boma and McCoy and Gaetano as well. You can see Gaetano kind of giving him the stink face here. And I mean, at this point, I think the resistance towards Spock is in his decisions is becoming a little unreasonable because, as Spock very reasonably observes, hey, we're on a timetable. It's not just that we need to get this fixed. We got to get this fixed and get up and where we can be seen, in a certain time frame. And they don't even know what time frame is. I'm sure Spock knows that they must go by at least a certain point, but says, we need to get this thing up in the air as soon as possible. And him staying back to work with Scotty makes that more likely to happen quickly. And he suggests McCoy attend and say some words. And McCoy's just like, oh, well, no, no, that's your job, Spock, not mine. Come on, Bones. That's being a little unreasonable here. Now, later, Spock and Scotty are working on the shuttle, but one of the fuel lines leaks and they lose the rest of their fuel. Then the giants who attacked earlier return as the surrounding area is filled with that strange noise they make. Spock says that it sounds like wood being rubbed against leather of some kind. Boma suggests hitting the aliens hard, and pretty much everyone else agrees, but Spock suggests a different course. He orders Boma and Gaetano to accompany him and attack the aliens, but his plan is to frighten them and drive them away, not kill them. Let me bring that up. There we go. And Gaetano and Boma aren't happy about that. One gets the impression that they're looking for some payback after Latimer's death. So Spock has Boma and Gaetano fire some warning shots. Did I pick up the wrong one? Here we go. Spock has Boma and Gaetano fire some warning shots to drive them away, and then Spock leaves Gaetano to guard the perimeter all by himself while he and Boma return to the shuttle. I'm sure there's absolutely nothing that's bad that's going to happen to Gaetano while he's here alone, and he's going to be just fine. Back at the shuttle, Scotty suggests using the phasers as an alternate fuel supply for the shuttle, and Spock orders Mears and McCoy to hand over their phasers. However, Gaetano's phaser doesn't do him much good, and he is eventually killed by the creatures. Later, Spock and McCoy and Boma find large footprints, and they also find Gaetano's phasers. Spock gives McCoy his phaser and Gaetano's and orders them back to the shuttle while he goes looking for Gaetano's remains, which he eventually finds, and he brings it back to the shuttle. And he arrives back at the shuttle just as the aliens start to attack again. And as McCoy notes, the giants weren't frightened away as Spock had expected, which leaves Spock puzzled, saying that retreat would have been the logical course of action for them. McCoy suggests that they responded emotionally with anger, arguing that Spock's logic has made the situation worse. Then one of the aliens begins hitting the shuttle with a boulder, and Spock is really puzzled as to why his logical approach hasn't been working. On the Enterprise, oh, here we go. On the Enterprise, Ferris tells Kirk that he's got 2 hours and 40 minutes left to continue the search. Back in the shuttle, Spock suggests electrifying the hull in order to drive the aliens away, which Scotty does, and it works. Spock then recommends finding other items to remove to lighten the shuttle. He notes that Gaetano's body will need to be left behind as well, and Bowman insists that they perform a burial. Spock says that it's too dangerous under the circumstances, but Boma says he'll accept the risk. Ultimately, Spock relents and says that he will allow the burial to take place. Meanwhile, the search parties that have beamed down to the planet have encountered the giant aliens and they've suffered casualties. At this point, Kirk's time is up, and Ferris, using his authority, asserts command of the ship, ordering Kirk to recall the search parties and depart for Machus 3. On the planet, the creatures attack as the burial is taking place and they flee back into the shuttle. But a boulder falls and traps Spock's leg, forcing Boma and McCoy to save him despite Spock urging them to leave him behind. They get Spock back to the shuttle to take off, but the creatures hold the shuttle down, preventing liftoff. Spock decides to use the boosters to overpower them and achieve liftoff. Of course, Spock, or rather Scotty, is dismayed by this because without the extra fuel that has been consumed by the boosters means that they're not going to be able to safely re-enter the atmosphere and land the shuttle. But Spock argues, well, if we can't take off and be seen by the Enterprise, then it doesn't matter anyway. All right, so it works, but they won't be able to maintain orbit for very long. And Scotty notes that earlier Spock said there are, or wait, I'm getting off on the wrong spot here. Okay. So Spock notes that earlier, or Scotty notes that earlier Spock had said there are always alternatives, but Spock says that he might have been in error. And McCoy says that if nothing else, at least he lived long enough to hear Spock say that. Spock then jettisons the fuel and ignites it. The others freak out when Spock does that, and Scotty notes that they only have a few minutes before the orbit begins to decay and they burn up on reentry. However, the Enterprise detects the burning fuel, and Kirk orders them to return to the planet. The shuttle begins to burn up on reentry, and Scotty realizes that Spock ignited the fuel basically to serve as a flare, a signal flare, in order to get the Enterprise's attention. And then they get beamed out of the shuttlecraft just as the shuttle begins to burn up on reentry. And Uhura informs Kirk that they were able to beam them off safely. Later on, Kirk suggests that Spock acted emotionally when he took the gamble of using the fuel as a flare to catch the Enterprise's attention. But Spock suggests that it was simply the logical thing to do, and they and they proceed to laugh uproariously, really overacting. I don't know how else to say it. It's not that funny, but they're wiping their eyes as if they're about to fall over in hysterics. I'm guessing since they're all doing it, I'm going to blame it on the director, Robert Gist, and say that he just told them to do that. And this one was co-starring Don Marshall as Boma, Peter Marco as Gaetano, John Crawford as Ferris, Phyllis Douglas as Yeoman Mears, and Reese Vaughn as Latimer, and Buck Maffey or Maffei, aside from the usual uh, supporting characters like Sulu and Uhura. Okay, so let me go ahead and move back to Cushman's book here. All right, now Oliver Crawford, with quite a bit of rewriting by others, provided the script. The former blacklisted actor, a victim of the 1950s Red Scare, had written for the Wild Wild West, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, and The Outer Limits. Crawford sold Roddenberry on the idea of doing a science fiction version of Five Came Back, a 1939 movie co-starring Lucille Ball in a rare dramatic role. For that film, a transatlantic flight is blown off course in a storm and crash lands in a South American jungle known to be inhabited by headhunters. Repairs are attempted on the plane, but due to a lack of fuel, some of the 12 crash survivors may have to be left behind. Crawford said, most of my approach as a writer had been to look to old movies and say, gee, this would make a good Western or a good detective story, or in this case, good science fiction. Okay, so as previously noted, this is an important episode in the development of Mr. Spock's character. It's really the first time that Spock's character has taken the spotlight and been more or less the lead in the episode, which to me is one of the main reasons why I like it so much. I'm very fond of this episode, even though it has some obvious deficiencies. But Nimoy as Spock is just so good, it's like, who cares? However, this episode is significant. Sorry, hit the wrong thing. Is significant for something else. And of course, that is that this is the first episode that introduced the shuttlecraft. If I can find it here. There it is. So the biggest challenge in realizing this episode remained in the making of the Galileo. Roddenberry had reluctantly done without a shuttlecraft for the enemy within, but this new script and the upcoming one for the menagerie could not be produced without this essential and expensive prop. Yet Desilu said no. Work on the script abruptly stopped and remained stalled for over 2 months. But then opportunity knocked. In July, NBC had begun to run on air previews of its new series for the fall. Glimpses of the magnificent Enterprise, as seen in the two pilot films, were now being beamed across America. Among those who caught sight of the unusual starship were the heads of AMT Corporation, a well known model kit manufacturer. Even though Star even though Star Trek had yet to premiere and there was no way of knowing whether it would last beyond 16 episodes, AMT wanted in. Specialty car designer Gene Winfield, who helped make the Galileo, recalled, quote, when Desilu needed a shuttle and AMT wanted the kit contract, they made a deal where AMT built and supplied the shuttle free to the series. The deal was closed on August 1st, 1966, having been negotiated between Ed Pearlstein of Desilu and Don Beebe of AMT. AMT got the exclusive model kit rights for the Starship Enterprise in exchange for providing two full-sized shuttlecrafts, one for exterior filming and a second for the interior shots, plus a miniature of the shuttle to be used for creating the photographic effects. Roddenberry turned his attention back to the script. It was felt that Crawford's simplistic handling of the material was not making the most of the underlying plot. It was also felt Crawford's agent would rightfully want additional money for his client doing additional rewrites. So a decision was made. If additional money were to be paid, someone other than Crawford should make the changes. Shimon Witzelberg, having impressed Roddenberry with his initial handling of Dagger of the Mind, was paid to add needed depth to the story. Crawford shrugged it off, saying, quote, they probably felt that I had run dry on the idea and came as far as I could. Winselberg turned in his version of Galileo 7 on August 18th, 10 days after Gene Kuhn came on Star Trek as the new frontline producer. In his version of the script, the High Commissioner Ferris was introduced, pestering Kirk to abandon the search and the crew of 6. Another change is that Yeoman Rand was actually put into the episode, replacing an earlier character named Yeoman Butler. Of course, she would eventually be removed herself after Grace Lee Whitney left the show and replaced by Yeoman Mears. Gene Kuhn took over his rewriting, and his final draft was completed on September 13th. This was his third script that he had now rewritten following Miri and the Conscience of the King. And it was at this point that Janice Rand was written out. As Kuhn had done with the Conscience of the King, the conflict between McCoy and Spock was amplified. He also injected some humor into the story and in the only place where it could be added, at the very end. Okay, so the director, and let me The director, Robert Gist, or Gist, again, I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, was 42 when hired. He was an actor turned director thanks to producer Blake Edwards. Gist was cast in the movie Operation Petticoat when he mentioned to Edwards that he really wanted to direct. Edwards gave him that chance for TV's Peter Gunn. Other credits included The Naked City and The Twilight Zone. Roddenberry met Gist when the latter directed an episode of The Lieutenant. John Crawford, playing High Commissioner Ferris, had appeared with Leonard Nimoy in 1952's Zombies of the Stratosphere, and DeForest Kelley in 1956's The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit. Among 100 plus TV credits included episodes of Superman, The Lone Ranger, The Twilight Zone, My Favorite Martian, Batman, The Time Tunnel, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, The Wild Wild West, and 14 episodes of Gunsmoke. His favorite acting job was for Lost in Space as Dr. Kronos in the episode The Time Merchant. Don Marshall, who was 30 when he was hired to play Lieutenant Boma, let me find. Let me see if I can find a better image of him here. Yeah, that's good. Had his first big role on TV in Roddenberry's The Lieutenant in the controversial episode To Set It Right, co-starring Dennis Hopper and Nichelle Nichols. With that exposure, he began working often, including multiple appearances on Rawhide, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, and Bob Hope Presents the Chrysler Theater. Then the producers on Doc Tari wanted Marshall as a regular for the fall of 1966. And this, in an unusual turn of events, brought him back to Roddenberry. Quote, I didn't want to be a regular on Doc Tari, Marshall admitted. As it turned out, I did 3 episodes, but I really didn't even want to do one. My agent at the time said, come on, these are my friends, just do the pilot. And I said, but I'm playing second fiddle to Marshall Thompson and a cross-eyed lion. And he said, you don't have to sign a contract, so just do it. So we did the pilot, and no one said anything about a contract. But in the middle of the 3rd episode, they came in and told me I had to sign one. I called my agent, and he told me that if I didn't do it, he would blacklist me, my own agent. And then the work suddenly stopped coming. I called Gene and I said, can you check for me to see if I'm being blacklisted? And he called me the next day and said, Don, I'm afraid you are. Look, there's a 1-day thing on Mission Impossible. Go do that and get your name in the trades and that you're working. So I did it, and then Gene called and said, I got a part I want you to do. And that was for the Galileo 7. And Gene was right about putting my name in the trades, because after I finished that show, then everybody was hiring me again. That's I tell you, man, that's cold. Your own agent is like blacklisting you. Jesus. Peter Marco, and let me find a good image of him. One where there he is. Peter Marco, as the doomed Lieutenant Gaetano, had a short career in front of the camera. Among his handful of credits was The Invisible Enemy, an episode of The Outer Limits where Marco, playing an astronaut, also dies at the hands of a sci-fi monster. That episode, incidentally, was written by Star Trek writer Jerry Soule. Rhys Vaughn, 31, played Latimer. Let me see if I can find him. Okay, let me bring this back up. Other way. There we are. There's Latimer in the background there. Rhys Vaughn at 31 played Latimer, and the first to die at the hands and spears of the Giants. He had already made multiple appearances on Alfred Hitchcock Presents, The Virginian, and 12 O'Clock High. And see if I can find Yeoman Mears, a good image of her. That's good enough. Phyllis Douglas as Yeoman Mears, stepping in for the sacked Grace Lee Whitney, made her acting debut at age 2 in Gone with the Wind as Bonnie Butler. As a young adult, she worked often in TV, including a pair of Batman episodes. And she would return to Star Trek as Hippie Girl number 2 in the notorious episode The Way to Eden. Ah, I didn't realize that going in. And then Robert Big Buck Matthey or Mathey, I'm not sure how you say it. Let me see if I can find a goodish. That's probably about as good as I'm going to get anyway. Robert Mathey, who was 7 feet tall, was cast as the Giant. He appeared in a handful of TV shows and small films, usually playing circus strongmen and the like, and had been in a pair of the first season of Lost in Space episodes, such as The Giant Cyclops, or in a pair of first season episodes as the Giant Cyclops. And let's see. And then there's Lieutenant Kellowitz, I'm guessing. Oh, I keep hitting that. Okay, so I want. I think I have to go the other way to get him. Okay, well maybe he's in the first one. Let me see if I can find him here. Well, what in the world? This thing won't advance. There we go. There we go. Finally found him. Grant Woods as Lieutenant Kellowitz would be seen in 2 more Star Trek's Arena and This Side of Paradise. Okay, what else here? All right, so this aired on January 5th of 1967. And it was 3rd in the ratings that night after The Dating Game and My Three Sons. At least it was in the it was in both the first half hour, 8:30 to 9, and the 9 to 9:30, in which it was 3rd behind the Thursday Night Movie and Bewitched. The dip in the ratings for Star Trek weren't the only problem. We had a failure, Leonard Nimoy said. The Spock character had been so successful that somebody said, let's do a show where Spock takes command of the vessel. I had a tough time with it. I really appreciated the loss of the Kirk character for me to play against and to comment on. The Bill Shatner Kirk performance was the energetic driving force, and Spock could kind of slipstream along and make comment and offer advice and give another point of view. Being put into a position of being the driving force or the central character was very tough for me, and I perceived it as a failure. Regardless, Nimoy recalled this as representing a big step in the evolution of Spock. He said, quote, little by little, I began to understand that it was possible to play the suppressed emotion and give the audience an occasional peek of the struggle of the character. I think it's a very human character. He's dealing with a very human problem. We're all living our lives trying to find a balance between emotion and logic, I think. For that reason, the audience is identified with Spock. Don Marshall remembered watching the episode when it aired and said the effects were great for the time, and the exterior of that shuttlecraft looked really good on TV. On the set, it opened up and they could pull it apart to get different angles. So it was always half open when I was looking at it. There were the blinking lights and the buttons and so on, but it wasn't complete. Then I saw it on TV and it really worked. Everything looked good. And for me, the story worked because the characters worked. We might have seen more of Lieutenant Boma in Star Trek, Marshall added. Quote, they came back to me later on and asked me to become a recurring character. Let me bring him up again. Let's see. They came to me and asked me to be a recurring character. There were several scripts where they had written my character in, but it was not to be. Producer Irwin Allen saw Marshall playing Boma in the Galileo 7 and immediately envisioned him as a member of another crew for Land of the Giants. And Marshall would spend 2 seasons as one of that series' regulars. So, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very fond of this episode, despite the obvious defects in the series. Some of the conflict, as previously noted, is kind of heavy handed and feels a bit contrived, but not too bad. The main thing is just the whole failure with the Giants. I mean, they really should have just stuck with having the quote unquote giant be just like a big guy, like 7 feet or however tall that guy was, trying to pass him off as being, 10 or 12 feet tall. It doesn't work. Like there's the scene, I don't think I've got a still frame of it, but there's one where Spock fires his phaser at one of the creatures who's holding a shield, and then he drops a shield which falls on the ground in front of Spock and the others. And when it falls, you see it's big, but it's clearly like something reasonable for a human-sized person. Then they walk over to examine the shield, and immediately the shield is like massive. It's bigger than they are, and it just doesn't work very well. And again, as noted, the the scenes where they're throwing the spears and they just sort of plop on the ground in front of them, it doesn't work very well. The threat that the Giants pose isn't very convincing, and it wasn't even convincing when I was a kid, when I was little, and it certainly isn't now. But still, because of the focus on Spock, I really like this episode myself. And I'll give this one, I guess, an overall grade of what, probably a B plus. Okay, so I will go ahead and wrap it up there. And before I go, let me again mention the GoFundMe that's been assembled or organized for Clobby. And if you can, please do give to the GoFundMe to help his family with the medical costs of his hospitalization. And again, I'm not really a religious person, but the hopes and prayers that I have, I do offer them to Clobby and to his family. I do hope he will make a recovery from this. Um, and I wish you the best, buddy. So sorry this happened. And give if you can. So I will go ahead and stop there. I probably will not live stream on Sunday night as I tend to do because I'm going to be seeing the Lord of the Rings this weekend. I believe Sunday I'll be seeing the Two Towers, I think, and it's the extended version, so it's pretty long. And I don't think I'm going to get back in time to stream at my usual time. I'm not sure what time I'm getting back because I think it's at 4, so I probably won't be back before 8. So I probably just won't stream. And let me think. So I did recently drop a new video on this last Saturday. It is a trailer, a digital AI trailer I've created of a Thundar the Barbarian movie. For those of you who remember Thundar from the old cartoon, this one is about 1 minute long. It is a teaser trailer. And I do plan to do a full length trailer, at least 2 minutes long, hopefully in the next week or two. and post that as well. So look for that. And I guess that'll wrap it up here. Thank you to those who tuned in during the stream, and we'll catch it on a rewatch. And if you watch the stream, please do like it and also sub to the channel and check out some of my other videos while you were here. And I will see you next time. Have a good evening.